picture this moment with me? The year is 1974 and steam rises from your mother's coffee cup while Anne Murray's voice drifts through the kitchen from that old wooden radio perched on the windowsill. Outside, frost covers the maple tree in your front yard, and somewhere down the street you can hear the satisfying thunk of hockey pucks hitting garage doors. This was life in 1970s Canada, when time moved at a different pace entirely, when Saturday mornings belonged to children, and Sunday dinners brought families together around tables that knew every conversation by heart. If you lived through those years, you carry these memories in your bones. The weight of snow-soaked mittens, the metallic taste of freezing air during recess, the peculiar comfort of wood paneling and orange shag carpet that seemed to exist in what felt like every Canadian home from St. John's to Victoria. But this isn't just nostalgia talking. This is the story of how an entire generation learned what home really meant. Walk with me down any residential street in Calgary or Saskatoon or Thunder Bay in 1976. Bungalows line both sides like friendly sentinels, each with its own personality expressed through different colored aluminum siding and carefully tended front gardens. Station wagons sit in driveways, their fake wood grain gleaming in afternoon sunlight, while somewhere nearby a screen door announces another child's escape into summer freedom. These neighborhoods hummed with unspoken rhythms that everyone understood. Mothers hung laundry on clotheslines that stretched from house to house like gossip networks made of cotton sheets and polyester shirts. Fathers emerged from garages on weekend mornings, toolboxes in hand, ready to tackle whatever mechanical mystery had presented itself during the week. And children, blessed children, roamed freely through this landscape that felt like absolute safety. In many neighborhoods, people rarely bothered locking their doors during the day. Why would they? Mrs. Henderson next door knew exactly when you left for work each morning and would keep an eye on things. The mailman, whose name was probably Don or Frank, knew which dog belonged to which house and would scratch old Rex behind the ears while sorting through letters that still arrived with real handwriting on the envelopes. This trust wasn't naive or foolish. It was earned through thousands of small interactions, through borrowed cups of sugar and shared snow shovels, through knowing that if your child scraped a knee 3 blocks away, some adult would appear with band-aids and gentle words before walking them safely home. Childhood in 70s Canada meant waking up on Saturday mornings to the sound of cartoons echoing from wood grain television sets across the entire country. The Flintstones and Scooby-Doo provided the soundtrack while you pulled on whatever clothes you could find on your bedroom floor, gulped down a bowl of Sugar Crisp or Fruit Loops, and prepared for adventures that would last until those orange streetlights began their evening vigil. Your bicycle represented pure freedom, not some expensive mountain bike with 27 gears and shock absorbers, but a simple machine with maybe a banana seat or playing cards clothes pinned to the spokes, so they'd make that magnificent flapping sound that announced your arrival from 3 streets away. You rode until your legs ached and your lungs burned, exploring neighborhoods you'd seen hundreds of times but which somehow revealed new mysteries every single day. The rules were simple and absolute. Be home when the streetlights came on. This law governed childhood from coast to coast, understood by every kid who ever lived in those neighborhoods. When that orange glow began spreading across sidewalks and driveways, you dropped whatever game you were playing, abandoned whatever fort you were building, and pedaled home as fast as your young legs could manage. Inside, kitchens smelled like home in ways that seem impossible to recreate now. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the meat falling apart after hours in the oven, hamburger helper on nights when your mother felt too tired to cook from the scratch. And sometimes, if you were particularly fortunate, your father would arrive home carrying those distinctive red and white Swiss Chalet boxes, and you'd feast on rotisserie chicken and fries with that magical sauce that seemed to exist nowhere else on earth. Dinner happened around tables where everyone had assigned seats and designated responsibilities. You set the table, your sister cleared the dishes, your brother took out the garbage, your parents asked genuine questions about your day because there was time for genuine answers, because no phones buzzed with urgent notifications, because television remained silent in the next room until meals ended properly. These conversations mattered in ways we didn't fully appreciate then. Your mother wanted to know which friends you'd played with, whether you'd found that particular frog you'd been hunting all week, if you'd managed to fix the chain on your bicycle. Your father shared stories from his workday, complaints about traffic or weather or the government, dreams about cottage trips or new fishing equipment. Life moved slowly enough that details had significance. Saturday evenings across Canada meant one sacred ritual. Hockey night in Canada brought families together in living rooms and finished basements, settling onto couches covered in scratchy plaid fabric, or spreading across shag carpet that held the mysteries of 1,000 spilled snacks. When that theme music began, you knew without question that you belonged to something larger than your own small world. Millions of Canadians watched identical moments unfold on identical screens. The same incredible saves, the same devastating goal, the same player interviews that you'd discuss at school Monday morning with friends who'd witnessed exactly the same magic. This shared experience created bonds that stretched from Newfoundland fishing villages to British Columbia logging towns. Television offered other treasures that reflected your country back to you. The beachcombers on Sunday nights following Nick Adonidas through adventures along the Pacific coast that looked remarkably like the Canada you knew from family vacations, King of Kensington, where Larry King navigated Toronto neighborhood life with humor that felt familiar and true. These weren't glossy American productions about impossible families living impossible lives. These were your stories, your landscapes, your sense of what made life worth living. Radio provided constant companionship throughout Canadian homes. Anne Murray's smooth voice accompanied dishwashing and floor sweeping. Bachman-Turner Overdrive cranked from transistor radios in garages where fathers pursued mysterious weekend projects. Gordon Lightfoot soundtracked lazy Sunday afternoon drives when entire families piled into station wagons with no particular destination in mind, just the desire to see what lay beyond familiar streets. Music wasn't curated then. You listened to whatever played on CFRB or Chum and loved it because your neighbors loved it too. Because songs created shared cultural experiences that connected entire communities. When American Pie or Heart of Gold came on, everyone knew the words, everyone sang along, everyone belonged to the same musical moment. Those station wagons, with their fake wood paneling and seats that could accommodate half the neighborhood, enabled summer expeditions that felt like journeys to distant planets. Long drives to cottage country in Muskoka, with its rocky Canadian shield landscapes and lakes so clear you could see bottom from remarkable depths. The Kawarthas, with their connected waterways perfect for canoe adventures, or perhaps all the way to Prince Edward Island, if your family possessed sufficient time and your father sufficient patience for maritime travel. No GPS guided these journeys with robotic precision. Instead, paper maps spread across your lap while you traced highways and secondary roads with your finger, helping navigate while your mother pointed out landmarks in small towns worth remembering. The backseat served as battleground for sibling territorial disputes, but once you reached open highway with city limits disappearing behind you, everything settled into peaceful anticipation of adventures ahead. Windows rolled down, warm summer air carrying scents of farmland and forest while tires hummed steadily against asphalt. These cottage trips represented paradise for many Canadian families. Not luxury lakeside mansions, but simple cabins near water with screen doors that never quite closed properly and beds that sagged toward the middle and wooden docks where entire days disappeared in cycles of diving in, climbing out, diving in again until your skin wrinkled and shoulders burned pink under relentless Canadian sun. Campfires after dark when mosquitoes emerged and temperatures finally dropped to bearable levels. Marshmallows on sticks held over flames until they caught fire and required quick extinguishing. The haunting sound of loons echoing across dark water in the stillness. These trips weren't about impressive amenities or comfortable accommodations. They were about disconnecting completely from regular routines and reconnecting with each other. No distractions, no rigid schedules, just nature and family and time that stretched endlessly forward. Return home after summer's end brought comfortable rhythms that felt right and natural. Weekday mornings smelled like toast and coffee and possibility. Radio played morning news while your mother poured milk from those peculiar plastic bags into glass pitchers, a ritual that made perfect sense if you grew up Canadian and never questioned why your milk came packaged differently than the rest of the world's. Your father grabbed lunch packed in metal containers, kissed everyone goodbye, and departed for work in cars that somehow never seemed to break down. You walked to school alone if you lived close enough, or with friends if you were fortunate to have neighbors your age. Nobody drove you unless weather turned absolutely brutal with snow piled past your knees. Walking was simply what children did, how you traveled, and nobody thought much about it. School felt different in those years, structured and predictable in ways that somehow provided comfort rather than constraint. Teachers possessed real authority that few parents questioned. You completed homework because that's what students were expected to do. You respected adults because that's how you were raised. Misbehavior brought real consequences that extended beyond classroom walls. If you got in trouble at school, you got in trouble at home as well. Double jeopardy with no appeals process. But honestly, most children stayed in line because life was good enough that acting out made little sense. You possessed freedom where it counted, freedom that mattered, freedom that was genuine. Why risk losing it over something meaningless? Afternoons after school followed patterns that felt natural and right. Drop your bag by the door, grab whatever snack your mother had prepared, head outside where the real day began, play until dinner, until your mother's voice carried down the street calling you home, until shadows grew long and that first streetlight flickered to life. Street hockey in cul-de-sacs with nets constructed from old pipes, baseball in empty fields with taped up balls and wooden bats that someone's father had crafted in shop class. Kick the can when groups were large enough, capture the flag when sun started setting and shadows made hiding places more effective and games more intense. This was childhood in 70s Canada. Simple, free, and somehow perfect in ways we didn't fully understand until decades later when we tried explaining it to our own children who would never quite grasp what we meant. Because how do you explain the feeling of riding your bicycle with no destination? How do you capture the taste of milk poured from bags or the sound of rotary phones ringing through entire houses? How do you recreate that trust, that freedom, that sense that everything would be okay? Winter in Canada during those years possessed its own particular magic. Snow that often stayed from December through March, creating landscapes transformed beyond recognition. Skating rinks that appeared overnight in neighborhood parks, maintained by volunteers who understood that children needed ice like they needed air. Hockey games that lasted until darkness made pucks impossible to follow, until fingers inside wool mittens went completely numb, until mothers appeared at rink edges calling everyone home for hot chocolate and grilled cheese sandwiches. Snow days meant genuine freedom from school responsibilities, entire neighborhoods of children emerging with sleds and toboggans to claim every hill within walking distance. Snowmen that required genuine engineering skills to construct properly. Snow forts that became elaborate military installations defended with carefully prepared snowball arsenals. Winter was a season to embrace rather than endure, a time when Canada revealed its truest character. Christmas arrived with ceremonies that felt sacred and permanent. Eaton's Catalogue appearing on kitchen tables, its pages carefully studied while family members circled potential gifts with ballpoint pens. Shopping expeditions to downtown department stores where elaborate window displays told stories that captured imaginations for weeks. Christmas trees that filled living rooms with pine scent and possibilities, decorated with ornaments collected over years, each one carrying specific memories and meanings. Christmas morning meant gathering around radios or televisions for familiar messages and traditions that connected your living room to living rooms across the entire country. Turkey dinners that began cooking before dawn and filled houses with smells that meant home and family and gratitude for simple abundance. Relatives arriving from distances that seemed vast, carrying presents and stories, and the particular joy that comes from being together during the darkest time of year. Spring's arrival felt like genuine resurrection after months of winter's grip. maple syrup season when sugar bushes steamed with sweet possibility, and entire families drove to sugar shacks for pancake breakfast that lasted entire mornings. First warm days when you could finally shed winter coats and feel sun on your skin without shivering. Tulips and daffodils pushing through soil that had seemed permanently frozen, proving once again that life finds ways to continue. The wider world existed, of course, but it felt manageable and distant. Vietnam War news on television, but it was happening somewhere else, to someone else. Trudeau as prime minister, either beloved or despised, depending on your family's political leanings. But politics remained adult concerns that didn't interfere with childhood's important business. Canada felt safe and stable and predictable in the best possible ways. Universal healthcare meant most families worried less about getting sick or injured. If you broke your arm falling off your bicycle, you went to the hospital and got it fixed without anyone calculating costs or checking insurance coverage at the kitchen table. This safety net provided psychological comfort that extended far beyond medical care. It meant your parents slept better, worried less, had energy for more important things like family dinners and weekend adventures. The new Canadian flag, still relatively fresh in those years, flew from schools and government buildings with pride that felt earned rather than forced. This was your country, with your symbols representing your values. Multiculturalism wasn't a policy slogan, but a lived reality in neighborhoods where Ukrainian, Italian, Portuguese, and Chinese families lived side by side, sharing recipes and celebrations and creating something distinctly Canadian. Corner stores anchored countless neighborhoods, run by families who knew their customers' names and preferences. You could walk to Kozlowski's or Sing's Market for penny candy, comic books, or last-minute ingredients your mother needed for dinner. These weren't faceless chain stores, but genuine community institutions where relationships mattered more than profit margins. Public transportation often felt like it really worked in those years. Buses ran on predictable schedules, cost reasonable amounts, and felt safe enough that parents allowed children to use them independently. Subway systems in larger cities were clean and efficient by the standards of the time. You could travel across Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver without requiring automobiles, and many families chose to live without cars entirely. Yet change was coming, though we didn't recognize it at the time. Shopping malls were appearing on the edges of cities, drawing customers away from downtown cores with promises of convenience and selection. Fast food restaurants were multiplying, offering quick meals that gradually replaced family dinners around kitchen tables. Television programming was expanding beyond local Canadian content to include more American shows that portrayed different values and different ways of living. Technology was advancing quietly in laboratories and corporate offices, preparing to transform communication and commerce in ways that would make our 70s childhood seem impossibly quaint. But for now, for these precious years, life maintained rhythms that had persisted for generations. People saved money for things they wanted rather than borrowing against future earnings. Families stayed in the same neighborhoods for years, sometimes decades, building relationships that deepened over time. Children played outside until darkness forced them indoors, their imaginations shaped by real experiences rather than virtual entertainments. This wasn't a perfect time, and these weren't perfect communities. Racism existed, though often more quietly than today. Women faced limitations on career opportunities that seem shocking now. Indigenous Canadians endured systematic discrimination that was shamefully widespread. Homosexuality remained largely hidden and certainly not celebrated. Environmental concerns were barely acknowledged, despite growing evidence of serious problems. But within the boundaries of that imperfection, something beautiful and sustainable was happening. Families were strong. Communities were connected. Children were safe and free in ways that seem almost impossible now. People trusted each other because they had reasons to trust, because they shared experiences and values and hopes for the future. You could often leave your bicycle on your front lawn overnight without worrying too much about theft. You could send your child to the corner store with $1 and know they'd almost certainly return safely with the milk and change. You could have disagreements with neighbors without calling police or lawyers or social media platforms to resolve disputes. Problems were solved through conversation and compromise, and the recognition that everyone had to continue living together in the same small space. Perhaps that's what made 70s Canada so special. The scale remained human. Your world consisted of people you could actually know, places you could walk to, experiences that connected you to your community rather than isolating you from it. Life moved at a pace that allowed relationships to develop naturally, that gave children time to grow up gradually, that let families build traditions worth preserving. These memories aren't just nostalgia, though nostalgia certainly plays a role. They're evidence of possibilities that once existed and might exist again if we remembered what made them work. They remind us that convenience isn't always better than connection, that efficiency doesn't necessarily create happiness, that newer isn't automatically superior to older ways of doing things. Close your eyes one more time and return to 1975. Coffee's brewing in the kitchen while Gordon Lightfoot plays softly on the radio. Outside, children are laughing as they race their bicycles down quiet streets under the watchful eyes of neighbors who care about their safety. Dinner will happen at 6 o'clock sharp with everyone gathered around the same table, sharing stories from their day. For one perfect moment, everything in the world feels exactly right. Life was simpler then, but simple in the best possible way. Simple like summer afternoons that lasted forever and winter evenings when entire families gathered around radios to listen to hockey games together. Simple like trusting your neighbors and knowing your place in the community and believing that tomorrow would probably be even better than today. That world still exists in memory, preserved in the minds of everyone who lived it, ready to be shared with anyone curious enough to listen. These stories matter because they remind us what home actually feels like when everything works the way it should, when communities function properly, when childhood is allowed to unfold at its own natural pace. If this brought back even one small memory you thought you'd forgotten, take a moment to hold on to it or share it with someone who was there with you. And if you'd like to keep walking back through these years, there's always another chapter of Canada's yesterday waiting in the next story.